there are two main entry points, and these points are located at the intersection of the Milky Way, which we can envisage as going around the planet this way, and the ecliptic, through which the planets move around Earth, rising in the east, setting in the west, just like the sun. We see the
Mhm.
sun do. So that those two pathways intersect at 2 points, and at those 2 points are where these portals are located.
All right, everyone, welcome to the Infinite Wisdom Experience. And today we have a most interesting guest, P.D. Newman. He's been immersed in the study and the practice of shamanism, alchemy, hermeticism, and theurgy for more than 2 decades. And he's the author of the book Is it Theurgy, P.D.? Am I pronouncing it
Theurgy.
Theurgy, the
That's
theory,
right.
practice, and angels of Vermilion. And he's here today to share this fascinating journey. PD, welcome, welcome, welcome to the show. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
All right, so let's get to it. Um, First things I want to ask you is really, who were the Mississippians? Because you're from Mississippi, right?
I am. And Mississippians, while they did occupy the state of Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
their name is not in reference to the state, but to the river, because it refers mainly to the natives that lived in and around the lower Mississippi Valley.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they were so they've been there for how long? I
Oh,
mean,
well, um, there's different dates in terms of the archaeology and in terms of ethnographies, but it's generally agreed that they emerged around 1000 AD. So um, they followed the Hopewell Adena natives. So they're
mhm,
the immediate subsequent group of indigenous Americans that emerged following that time.
right.
And um, but I say that there's a little bit of disagreement because, for instance, the iconography that's explicitly associated with the Mississippians, the earliest examples of it have been dated to around 800, 900. So a couple of centuries before, and recent tests that will soon be published, but haven't been, so I won't state those dates explicitly. I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but it's going to potentially push that date back much earlier.
hmm And where did your fascination with this topic come from?
Well, I live in Mississippi, so I've been here, since the early 90s, and
Mhm.
here where I live in North Mississippi, there are 8 or so mounds that you could pass on, for example, the Natchez Trace. There are a number of them,
hmm
but they're surrounding this area, Tupelo specifically. So I could go roughly 30 minutes in any direction and run into a mound in any of those chosen directions. So I've
hmm
always seen them since I was a child and been utterly fascinated with them because many of them, we hear mound and we think hill, something like the
Right.
Tor, right?
Yeah.
But many of the mounds here are more like trapezoids, like flat top pyramids
Mm.
that have,
Hmm. Okay.
4 clearly delineated sides with a flat top, where at one point there's evidence that they were topped with small buildings, small houses, often what are called charnel houses, which were used to
Mm-hmm.
house the bones of the dead, religious statuary, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So my interest goes way back. Now, um, that got ramped up considerably when I got exposed to the Mississippian culture proper, and especially to their afterlife model, which is known as the path of souls. And that's what really grabbed my attention and made me, dive headfirst into this stuff and just immerse myself in it.
So the Path of Souls, I looked a little bit of your stuff, and it's described. I think it's described often as like the journey of the dead, right? Do you think that also represents a metaphysical initiation for living? Because I know that in my own experiences, I've had plant-based medicine experiences where I've got to that what I experience and can communicate it as is like the border between life and death, and looking on the other side and going, oh, that's all okay, no problem. It's like, and the fear of that just kind of just dissipated.
That's exactly right, Gary. That's one of the main points of my book is that notion specifically, that while it is an afterlife journey that the soul takes following the death of the body, it's very much uh, both a template for a ritual structure. So this information would have been communicated in a ritual way and in the form of a mythodrama.
Mhm.
And it's also something that could be experienced directly through the induction of deep trance states, which were arrived at by a number of means, but certainly with psychedelic plants and even animals in some cases. Uh,
Mhm.
so that's absolutely the case here. That
So you're bridging, the shamanism, alchemy, ancient spiritual systems. Was there a personal experience for you, perhaps a moment of your initiation that set you on the path?
oh, absolutely, yes. So what really got me into studying all of this mystical and magical territory was psychedelics.
Mhm.
Being in Mississippi, we are able to go out into cow fields and see the mushrooms, psychedelic,
Nice.
what's the psilocybin mushrooms,
Psilocybin. Mhm.
cubensis specifically.
Time for
They're
a road
very
trip, Gary.
yeah, come on. But they're very plentiful here, and
Huh.
they were first brought to my attention when I was around 11 years old, is when I learned how to identify them and
Hmm.
first began experimenting with them. And it absolutely changed the direction of my life, 100%. And
Mhm.
I, you know, I had been raised in church, just like most Southern boys are. Uh,
Right.
but to be honest, I had no real concept of what worship meant beyond standing there in, in the pews listening to a
Yeah.
preacher. Like
Hmm.
that was my concept of worship. But from the very first time I ingested a psychedelic, it dawned on me what worship was and that I was in a state of worship. Yeah, so
Nice.
and it was those experiences and the anyone who develops a relationship with these plant spirits, the experiences develop. It's not a stagnant thing. They change with you and you grow with them. And it got to a point where I had no vocabulary for what I was experiencing.
Beyond words, yeah.
I couldn't process it. And
Yeah.
I had, encountered language that was similar to what I was undergoing in Eastern texts, like the Tao Te Ching and the Vedas, Buddhist texts. But in Mississippi, there's nothing like that. There's no one I could go talk to and say, what do I do with this? And I had at that point had also been immersing myself in Western modes of mysticism and magic, and
Mm.
a number of those addressed masonry within that kind of a context, that it was a
Mhm. Yeah.
mystical path available in the West, and masonry
Mhm.
is very visible in the South. Yeah,
Right.
it's you see it everywhere, and so it was something I could reach out and in the hopes of getting involved, learning what I could, and that's exactly what I did. I petitioned a lodge. I never expected to get accepted, but I did, and it, just like with psychedelics, it reorientated me, and didn't take me on a new path, but it certainly kind of put me on one that was far more open to the notion and power of ritual. And that, so, you know, uh, I would have to say, yes, the psychedelics put me on this path. And uh, if I hadn't have encountered them, I doubt seriously that I would know anything about this kind of thing. And
Mhm.
and people, traditional Masons, hear something like that and they think, well, I've never done psychedelics. Why do you need that to get involved in Masonry? And everybody's different. But for me personally, I don't think I would have even considered
Mhm.
anything like that were it not
Yeah.
for what I
Mhm.
experienced with those mushrooms.
It opens up these portals of possibility that your conscious mind in our regular everyday conditioning just doesn't have access to, right?
I agree. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Now, is this
And
is this is this practiced by, I mean, are these path to soul of path of souls, is that something that's still continually practiced? Are there still groups of people who are true to the original processes, or as you said,
In the indigenous community.
or any community actually? I mean, we know, I mean, like history has shown us that, whether it be from the Aztecs to the Freemasons to the all the big movements that have been from the centuries ago, some sort of psychedelics were somewhat somewhere somehow involved, and
Mhm.
that information has been kind of filtered or distilled down or simply kept away from the general public. And we
Yeah,
find even some theories are that that psychedelics were the reason that Homo sapiens became what we are. Is
sure.
expanded the mind, and as Gary said, it opened up these paths of possibilities. Like, well, wonder if I did try this, or what if I did do it like this? So is
Mhm.
that still, like, I mean, are there, I don't want to use the word churches, but do they still have gatherings where people are practicing these rituals on a regular basis?
Not to my knowledge. Now we do
Okay.
have in the Mississippians are considered the eastern natives of North America.
Hmm.
In the West, we have very visible peyote use, and there's a
Hmm.
Native
Right.
American church. So
Hmm.
it's still very much present
Exactly.
for
Right.
them, but
Hmm.
for the Mississippian cultures and the tribes that came from that group, unless it's practiced in secret, I'm not sure that it still has survived. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't other groups working with afterlife models that are virtual mirrors of this path of souls, because
Mm-hmm.
that there absolutely are. Theurgy, the book that I wrote prior to this, had I not really been studying theurgy, I'm not sure I would have understood what was going on with the ritual component of the path of souls.
Okay.
Um, because the model is the same, and theurgy is something they're doing while very much alive. And in the path of souls, the soul sort of launches itself as though it were an arrow into a gateway, a portal that's in the stars, in a certain constellation. And that the constellation for us, we recognize it as Orion, but that's a Greek conception, the hunter. The natives of the Mississippians still recognize that same cluster of stars as being significant, but rather than a hunter, they saw it as a hand. They call it the chief's hand constellation, and it's a hand with what looks like an eye in the palm. It's not an eye, but it looks like an eye, and sometimes artistically it is depicted as an eye. But that hole, that spot in the hand, is actually the portal itself in the constellation. So there are two main entry points, and these points are located at the intersection of the Milky Way, which we can envisage as going around the planet this way, and the ecliptic, through which the planets move around Earth, rising in the east, setting in the west, just like the sun. We see the sun do. So that those two pathways intersect at 2 points, and at those 2 points are where these portals are located. So the soul gets into the you'll see it called the Ogee, Ogee, the Ogee portal, and that gives it access to the Milky Way galaxy, which is itself the path of souls proper. And we see an identical model in ancient Greece with theurgy, in late antiquity at least, but there's intimations as early as Plato, um, where the soul goes through a similar process of entering the one of these two portals and getting onto the Milky Way. And as early as Pythagoras, there was this notion that the Milky Way constituted the orbit of souls after or prior to incarnation. So it's virtually identical in that right. And we see something similar in Egypt with when we look at the pyramid texts and the pyramid of Unas, where we see the same thing. His soul, the Ba soul, and this is significant in a way. The Egyptians conceived of at least two souls, and some iterations you'll see more, but certainly two at its most basic. One is called the Ba, and that's the soul that can leave the body. It does so in the form of a bird with the face of the deceased. And the Ka does not leave the body. It remains on Earth, and it serves as like good luck for its descendants. So if you were to call on your grandfather, well, his Ba is gone, but his Ka is here for you to call on. And we see in the Mississippian model, they have the free soul, which is the soul that is able to go on this journey. But there's a second soul that is earthbound and remains here. And in the Egyptian model, that Ba soul travels. In the pyramid texts, it's instructing Unas to go to the constellation of Orion, which is for them Osiris. He becomes Osiris. He assumes the form, so he basically becomes the constellation. And then when that constellation sets on the hemisphere, that's seen as him going down into the underworld. And after this underworld journey, what they call the duat, um, he accesses what is called in the pyramid text the street of stars, and that's what they called the Milky Way. So, you know, to answer your question, yes, there are many survivals of this kind of ritual structure, and people who are practicing with the Egyptian model, practicing with the Greek model. But here in North America, I haven't encountered any indigenous Americans that do come from the tribes that were Mississippian that are
Mhm.
doing this, and certainly that are doing psychedelics in the way that peyote is so visible. Now, tobacco is another story, and
Okay.
I like to mention this because tobacco is such a commercial product, and we don't think about it as being visionary or even sacred.
Yeah.
But for them, it was. And
Yeah.
the tobacco they were using, Nicotiana rustica, um, is can be anywhere between 3 and 9 times as potent as Nicotiana tabacum, commercial tobacco. And in addition to that, it also has fairly high concentrations of monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which is one of the components of ayahuasca.
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
consuming Nicotiana rustica, uh, I'll give you an example. When I began this research and it came time for me to treat the use of tobacco among the Mississippians in the book, I had no experience with it. I've always had pulmonary issues. You know, I had asthma as a child, so I always avoided smoking, and I had no attraction
Yeah.
to dip or chewing tobacco, so I had no concept of it, and I wanted to treat it to do it justice in the book and treat it faithfully. So I thought, I need to bite the bullet and at least experiment with tobacco and see what it does. And I reached straight for the tobacco they were using, which is the rustica. I got some seeds, planted it, grew it, learned how to cure it.
Wow.
And my very first experience with it, I had a Peterson pipe, not a very big pipe, and I packed it, and I might have gotten a third of the way through it, not even halfway through it. I was covered in sweat. Uh, I started getting kind of like passing in and out of consciousness, and eventually I did pass out and had very vivid visions of there was lightning and I saw horses that, not to be gruesome, but they were bloody horses. You know how visions can be with psychedelics. Um,
Hmm.
so right off the bat, I realized there is a very real visionary potential with this substance, and they were certainly accessing that and exploiting it and I mean that in the best way possible.
Interesting.
Right. So part of some of my reading, I read that the Path of Souls is a way of connecting with past lives as well.
Now, the notion of past lives is certainly present in some tribes, but it's not
Mm.
universal.
Okay.
So that would be a localized application of the model.
Hmm.
whereas the path of souls, it's being kind of used, I hate to say it though, used by tribes that believe in reincarnation, that don't believe in reincarnation.
Hmm.
Um, and there are even, I've only encountered this in literature, but examples of some tribes that just believe in oblivion, for those who don't know about the path of souls, because it's
Hmm.
secret wisdom, it's initiated wisdom. So it's not like everybody in the tribe would have known this. This
Right.
was the wisdom that constituted the secret wisdom that made you an elite member of the tribe. So, and we see something similar in ancient Egypt. In the
Right.
earliest days, it's only the pharaohs that are able to have this information. That's why it's in the pyramids. But pyramids, it's carved in stones. They're for
Mhm.
ages and ages. So people come along, Egyptians who aren't pharaohs read that. Well, now they have access to that wisdom. It becomes something they can sell to you in a coffin, and it becomes coffin texts where they paint them on the inside of coffins. And papyrus becomes commonly available to, lower caste, lower class Egyptians. And we see books of the dead start emerging, and where virtually anyone who can afford it can have their own Book of the Dead, instructing them on how to get there. But in the earliest days, it's only the pharaohs,
Hmm.
and that's what we're seeing with the Mississippians. It's only the chiefs and the elite who have been initiated into this wisdom.
So I'd like to kind of circle back a little bit because I'm not familiar with the Mississippian mounds, and I think I'm pretty tapped in. So can you talk a little bit about them
Mhm.
and what they are, who
How big they
who
are.
yeah, just like give us some context around that so that I can kind of understand what they are outside of what I've read, right?
Yeah, yeah. They can be many sizes, many shapes. Like I said earlier, some of them are trapezoidal shaped. Um, they can be enormous. There are some mounds at very famous sites like Cahokia.
So are they like rock based? Like what's the landscape?
They
What
no, there it's earth, but it's
okay.
certain types of earth, and
Hmm.
so if we were to go out and take a bunch of soil and build a giant hill, it might be there for a few generations, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's gonna wash away. They knew how to stack different types of soils, clays, and
Mm,
things that made them stable so that they're still here, 1,000 years, sometimes 10,000 years. Like the some of the mounds in Louisiana are evidence shows that they're older even than Göbekli Tepe. They are ancient structures.
Mhm.
Um, but
But they are just a mound. I mean, they're
so
not,
what was
there's
the purpose? Like
inside them.
so they're
it's
yeah, so
not a
they're
it's not a stone structure, even though
sure.
there
Not a
might
building.
be there
Hmm.
might be stones incorporated into it. Sacred stones is like a common thing that we see in certain layers, is the incorporation of broken pottery pieces, which
Mm,
is kind of rock-like. It's not
hmm.
a rock, but it's rock-like. But no, they're earth, and they can be the what I was getting at a moment ago. There are mounds that the base is larger than that of the Great Pyramid. Some
Hmm.
of the mounds are as big as the Pyramid of the Sun at
Wow.
Teotihuacan. They can be
Okay.
enormous, and it's hard to wrap your head around how big that is until you're
Uh-huh.
standing by it or standing on top of it. Many of
Hmm.
them are upkept by national park services. So there
Okay.
are oftentimes steps built
Hmm.
along the
Got it.
side so that you can climb to the top and you just feel dwarfed in comparison to them. So they
Hmm.
can be enormous, and they're oftentimes in organized uh, layout. They sometimes you'll see one or two mounds, but other times you get an entire mound system that in a way serves as an ancient calendar because some mounds align with sunrise and sunset on
Hmm.
solstices, equinoxes. They were particularly interested in the long lunar cycles. When you think about recording time, the sun, it might take a few generations to realize that it's rising in a place different on the horizon throughout the year. But that's something that you'll come to realize. But the moon, you can realize real quick that its phases change. So it's probable that the earliest calendars were lunar calendars and the solar
I believe so too. Yeah.
calendars
Yeah.
came later.
Hmm.
And with the Mississippians and even with the Western natives at Chaco Canyon, we see this. It's the same that they are preoccupied with an 18.6 year lunar cycle.
Hmm.
So we know that the moon, a lunar month, 28 days, there are 13 months and a lunar year.
Yeah.
But just like with the solstices and equinoxes, the place at which the moon rises on the horizon is another layer to this, another depth to lunar time. And it takes 18.6 years to return back to where it rises at the beginning of that cycle.
Hmm.
Um, and that's the year, that's the time chunk that they would operate within. Major celebrations occurred at the halfway point, at the 9.3
Hmm.
year uh, count, and then at the 18.6 year count.
Interesting. Hmm.
But the mounds are placed in such a way that they can stand on them and look in these different directions. And when it aligns with this mound over here, they know it's X solstice or equinox, which would then mean it's time to harvest, it's time to plant,
Hmm.
different it's time to send the souls of the dead elite into the portal. So I should have probably mentioned that before I got into that, but the path of souls is temporally based. The portal can only be accessed um, in and around the winter solstice. That's the
Hmm.
time that Orion is visible in the night sky.
Okay.
So if the elite died any other time outside of the winter solstice, their bones were stored in those charnel houses I mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
So when the winter solstice approaches, that would indicate to them it's time to prepare the bones for the ritual to send them, help them go into the path of souls.
Interesting.
And then the bones would be properly disposed of. In some cases, which is very rare, but we see it, they were cremated, and in other cases, they're buried. And oftentimes in or on the mounds is where these bodies are placed. At Etowah is a good example. There are bodies all over the mounds. But
So, do
and
you believe that
and
these mounds, themselves, do you feel they still hold this energetic or spiritual charge?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yes. when you approach the mound, seeing it is one level of just feeling overwhelmed. But when you approach it and spend time with it, especially when you're on top of them, there there is a undeniable just feeling of it's different for everyone. I get a feeling of being energized and almost like enthusiasm, like vital interest. I get into this space of incredible focus. For me, when I get on mounds, I notice I start producing poetry, spontaneous poetry. So when I go on
It's
a
similar
mound,
to type of experiences that people have when they go into like crop circles. I hear those kinds of stories all the
Mhm.
time, right? That
I
there's this
believe
energetic
it.
component
That
that, yeah.
I have an entire series of poems that I could say I wrote them, but I didn't write them. They started
Hmm.
coming out when I'm on the mound. So I'm always
Channel
ready
them. Yeah.
with something to record them when I go to the
Interesting.
mounds because they come out. But now other people I've taken to the mounds, I've seen them get very physically ill. They get fatigued, they'll get nauseous, dizzy.
Yeah.
Um, so it affects people in different ways. And Greg Little, who wrote the book on the Path of Souls that really opened me up to the whole phenomenon, uh, he talks a lot about the electromagnetic forces around these mounds and that they're observable objectively,
Hmm.
that they do have anomalies to them. And it's
Hmm.
very possible that those are what are causing positive or negative effects.
Sure, your vibrational frequency is going to either resonate with or not, and that's
Yeah.
the conflict or the symbiotic experience they have. So yeah.
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 It's worth speculating, I think.
So I'm looking at some of the mounds now, and I recommend everybody go online and just Google them. They are massive.
Yeah.
They are. I mean, I would, to the point where I'm just like using even the term mound is really not the right one. I'm just like, these things are huge, and I'm shocked at the point to the point where, I've lived in this country all my life and I've never heard of these.
It's
It's like
wild.
a
And
like a
people, we
like this
think of
well-kept secret.
the Great Pyramids.
Hmm.
Every
Yeah,
American knows about the Great Pyramids and think, oh, I want to
exactly.
visit Egypt. Here we've got our own
Right.
types of these types of structures, and it's
That's wild.
virtually unknown. But in other countries, it's not the case. When I
Right.
travel around in Europe, Australia, everybody that I encounter and discuss this with, oh yeah, I've wanted to visit the mounds. I
Really,
want,
that's
yeah,
interesting.
it's like common knowledge. I think we just take it for granted and to the
Wow.
point
Yeah.
that it's not even, it's just, and I
So is
don't
it
think
very
I would know
touristy then?
about
Like,
them.
do you find a lot of touristy people are in like coming to check the mounds out? Like, what's their
It
Yes,
doesn't.
especially at places like Cahokia,
Yeah,
Spiro.
that's one of the
Cahokia is
popcorn
in
spots.
Illinois, Spiro is in
hmm,
Oklahoma,
Hmm.
Etowah is down in Georgia, Moundville in Alabama.
hmm,
Those places attract tourists from all over the world. You
that's
know,
wild.
we in Mississippi, we have uh, mound sites that aren't quite as large as those. Those are like little cities. Um,
Hmm.
our mounds tend to be, one, two, three. I know the Far Mounds, Pharr, which is on the Natchez Trace, literally 20 minutes from here. Um, there are seven of them,
Wow.
but only four are visible. The other three, farmers didn't always know what these things were, and they would level them. Sometimes
Oh,
they would
geez.
just what am I trying to say? Not mow, but plow. They would plow
Hmm.
over them,
Hmm.
so the other three aren't visible. And just yesterday, my youngest son, Bacchus, and I were at Ingomar Mound, which is about a 30-minute drive from here. There's only one mound left that's visible. They've preserved the area and marked off where they used to be, and you can look at a map, and then you look in that direction and you can kind of see the indication of a slight bulge, but
Interesting.
it's
Mhm.
almost gone,
Yeah.
which is just tragic.
And they're not, I mean, they're not as distinct as the pyramids in Egypt. Because they've got grass on them and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I grew up on the East Coast, and there was a lot of things that, I used to go on tours and history trips, all that kind of stuff. And if I saw something like this now, without prior to our conversation today, I would like, oh, that's probably left over from the Civil War. That's just where my
Mm,
brain would go.
yeah,
That
yeah.
just looked like a parapet that they created for the Civil War to give them
And they
leverage.
used them. They
Right.
used them
That was
during
my
the
next
wars.
question. I bet they
There's
did.
there's there's a mound in Memphis, Tennessee, that they hollowed out the center of, and
Yeah,
so
I
it's
see that.
basically
Interesting.
a fortress,
Hmm.
and they dug tunnels through it. And there's one that the door is sealed up now, but the door is still there. It's where they would store arms during the war, and those tunnels allegedly go miles under the city in case they needed to retreat from the battle site on the river.
Wow.
So you're spot on with that.
Yeah.
They were associated with those wars,
Hmm.
but that's definitely not where they came from. And even the Mississippians, they they built some mounds, but most of them, they didn't build them. They embellished and maintained mounds that were left from the Hopewell and the Adena. And
Hmm.
that there are still mounds that they inherited. Nobody knows who built them. They just,
Hmm.
recognized the
Hmm.
sanctity of the site, took care of it.
Do we have any idea as far as like if again using the pyramids in Egypt, which we know have been ransacked, and they what they look like today is not even near what they used to look like, when they were first built. Were these Now they're covered with grass and moss and whatever the case? Were these more ornate in the past? Do we know?
No, they still were often covered in grass,
Hmm.
but there there were structures built on and around them.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, they would build on top of a pre-existing mound, what I call a sidecar mound, and they're like round mounds that'll be placed
Hmm.
on the side of one of the trapezoid mounds. And these
Right.
round mounds start emerging at the same time that uh, that the sauna, the sweat lodges, early
Hmm.
saunas were discovered. And so it's speculated that those are specifically associated with sweat lodges placed on the mounds.
Hmm.
So they would have been more ornate in terms of the structures placed atop them, but the mound itself is what's sacred. And the many of these tribes, they believe that they emerged from the earth. They would come up out of caves oftentimes. So when they build the mounds, they're in many ways they're building a man-made cave. And you see at Spiro, for instance, at Craig's Mound, it's hollow inside. There's an entire lodge in there with big posts surrounding it. So if you knew where the entrance was, which I believe was secret, you could get inside the mound, and ceremonies were likely held in there. So it's a
Wow.
man-made cavern, and even the ones that aren't hollow, when they're built with skeletons at the base.
Hmm.
There's often one, sometimes, and I know how this sounds, giant skeleton. The early records repeatedly you see at the base of the mound was found 7, 8, 9 foot skeletons
Wow.
there, and they can be placed in seated positions where you might have one at each of the cardinal directions. They're some where they're placed circular, where they're lying on their back and their feet form a circle in the middle, but there are
Hmm.
skeletons at the base. So they they are kind of liminal in that the natives emerge from the earth and return to the earth. They walk that line between, birth and death, and the mystery that surrounds those two notions of those two domains of human experience.
This is
So,
absolutely
I
fascinating.
mean, you spent, 2 decades immersed in these studies. I'm curious, has your personal views on death and the afterlife changed over time as a result of this? Especially
Yes.
coming from, the like you said, your church boy, and what's
Mhm.
the? I'm curious, what's the shift, or enhancement that's happened as far as your perspective on those?
In the earliest days of my life, I really only have to go on what I'm taught, and what I was taught
Hmm.
was heaven and
Yeah,
hell.
yeah.
But the older I've gotten and the more immersed in different domains of study, um, these days I'm really fascinated by uh, uh, coincidences
Hmm.
between different traditions. What is common to them, and even more so, and what is not common. How do they differ, and how do they arrive at these ideas that are so disparate from other traditions,
Which it
other
wasn't intended this way,
cultures?
but it's an awesome segue into my next question. So I'm going to hold on to that just for a second, because I saw that too with your book parallels between Native American Death Journey and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, as you talked about Tibetan Book of the Dead. Do you see indications of these two cultures where they were in contact at some point? Do you believe that they were tapping into a universal spiritual map? How does that synchronicity of those two fall into place, do you think?
That's a great question, and it's not one that I have an answer for.
Hmm.
The similarities between the Mississippian, the Greek, the Egyptian, there was no known communication that took place between these cultures. Now, Egypt and Greece, that's another story. They were in
Hmm. Yeah.
communication, but the Mississippians are isolated from them. My best answer, uh, we didn't talk about the Mayans and the Aztecs, but they
Right.
have a nearly identical model with the Milky
Sure.
Way as being this path of souls. And we know that when the climate changed and it got too dry in Central America, many of those indigenous went north and started inhabiting the southern states of North America, the southern portions.
Hmm.
So there was some transmission that came from there, but again, they weren't in contact with Greece and Egypt. Um, and we see a similar model. And if there is a continuation or communication, I think this is where it took place. We see a similar model in Siberian shamanism. And the Siberians, they are close to the locations where the Scythians occupied, and the Thracians are near this area. And there's throughout Greek philosophical texts and histories and myths, there's a lot of connections that are taking place between Scythians, Thracians, and the Greeks. So there could have been some transmission there. Now, Siberia is closely related to Mongolia in a number of ways. And some of the earliest Greek philosophy is connected to a Mongolian figure named Abaris, who traveled down and um, basically initiated, if you want to call it that, Pythagoras. There's a tradition in one of the life of Pythagoras, and there are a couple of versions, but in one of the versions, this figure who is an avatar of the Hyperborean Apollo comes down because he knows that another avatar of Apollo has been born in Samos area in Italy, and that's where Pythagoras was from. And according to this history, he comes down, confirms, and this is fascinating too in its own right. The way he confirms, and this is in a Greek text, the way he confirms that he is the reincarnation of this avatar that's passing through lives in this area is he places before him three or four objects and tells him to choose the one that was his in a past life, which is what we see with the Dalai Lama. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the same exact
Interesting.
process is how they choose the next Dalai Lama is because each
Mhm.
Lama is the reincarnation of the
Of the
previous.
previous. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in a Greek text, so I find that fascinating on its own, unconnected to Mississippians. But
Wow.
if there is a continuity, that I think that would have to be the direction it came, and the transmission of the Siberians along the Bering Strait into the Americas through Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Well, we're finding these correlations, I mean, across the planet. I mean,
right.
there's similar
It's
shapes being found
universal.
in Thailand and
Yeah.
in Asia. LIDAR has just discovered hundreds of them, at least down in Brazil,
Right. In South America,
in
they're
South
they're
America.
finding them all
Yeah.
all in the jungle. And
Right. As we our modern culture is bringing the bulldozers in, it's like, oh, we didn't know this was here.
right.
But there's so many similarities from all of these.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether it be
When
shape or why do we as a culture have a this need to rise above? Why do we have to build things so high? What is the significance there? And
that's a
is
great
it the
question.
same?
Yeah.
And is it the same from culture to culture to culture? Obviously they have their own version of it, but is that primary idea the same? The basic, it's like, well, to get closer to God, is that what it's all about? Nobody knows.
It's certainly possible.
Hmm.
There was an archaeologist that traveled down into South America that was studying the natives that were using ayahuasca down there, and they would lay in their hammocks, drink the ayahuasca, and lay in their hammocks and stare at the sky. And he asked them at one point, why do you do this? What's the goal of drinking ayahuasca? And the man told him that we're trying to get on the Milky Way. He said we're trying to raise our soul up, and it takes several tries. The first time you might get yay high, next time you might make it to the height of the moon, but the goal is we're trying to get on the Milky Way, and so it's kind of this universal fascination. We're all humans. We're all on planet Earth. We're all looking at the same skies. So it makes sense that a similar model would emerge. We're all being fascinated by the same things. We're all subject to the same limitations. We can't fly. Those kind of limitations inform and in a way determine how we approach and interact with, build relationships with the planet and the stars and things. But it it is so uncannily similar that it's hard to wrap your head around, because you would think the models would be different. And they do differ, but the similarities are what just makes you
Uncanny.
back up and say, what is going on here? You have to tap into like Jungian language with archetypes, and it's something bigger than us culturally and individually that is resulting in these structures and the stories and myths that surround them.
Mhm. Now, when you're saying that they want to connect with the Milky Way, is that just another term for the universe? I mean, or
No,
how did they
they're
know back
talking about the specific,
the specific Milky Way galaxy?
because you can see it, you can
Right.
see
Hmm.
the curvature of it.
Hmm.
Granted, it's bigger than that. We're just
Yeah,
in one little arm over
a little
here,
bit.
but they don't know that. Not, I
Mhm.
Right.
mean, let me rephrase that. They might know that, but objectively, they hadn't been out there. If
Sure.
they did know it, it would be a subjective knowing, and I
Hmm.
can't rule that out. But back then, there is no light pollution. Uh, I mean,
Right.
everything would have been crystal clear.
Yeah.
And once it gets dark, that's what's going to occupy your attention.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
how long did it take for man to discover fire? Prior to that discovery, that's all the light you get once it
Yeah.
gets dark,
Yeah.
So it makes sense that that would have occupied their attention. And over time, it became a way to um, preserve wisdom, knowledge. Stories were
Hmm. Yeah.
projected from in here out there, and narratives emerge with the constellations, individual stars. So it becomes a way to
For sure.
store ancient human wisdom somewhere out there so that it can be preserved for
Hmm.
everyone down here out that
Yeah.
are our descendants. And 100, 200, 1,000 years later, they have that same sky to look up and teach the children and say that over there and this cluster here, and let me tell you a story, and
Right. Yeah.
it becomes an external kind of memory, like a hard drive in a way.
I think it reminds me what you said. It just reminds me of an incident that happened. I think it was in the 80s, um, where Los Angeles had a major blackout. And all of a sudden, all that light pollution was gone,
Mhm.
and people could see the night sky for what it really is, and everybody was freaking out.
I
It's like,
bet.
oh my God, it's the end of the world. It's the end of the world. The sky is ripping apart. And it's like, no, that's what it really looks like.
Yeah,
And
can we just leave it off?
yeah,
Yeah. Right.
exactly. So, and and to think about that, because it is so beautiful, I um took a trip to Alaska one time, and very little light pollution there. And I that was my goal. This is, I just want to see the sky where there's just like nothing to get in my way. And it really is a profound feeling. You really get an
I
idea of how
bet. What
the
what what
universe
was
is.
the quality of that feeling? Are you able to communicate that?
No, it's
No.
just it was an awe. It was just an awe.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I
and
would
at
love
the
to go
same,
and see that.
time, you feel very insignificant to a degree. You feel very small,
Mm,
but it's just absolute awe. You're just like, and the beauty was indescribable.
yeah, we had a similar kind of experience recently. Um, I spoke at the New Hermopolis conference in Hermopolis in Egypt, and New
Hmm.
Hermopolis is just this kind of oasis out in the desert. And uh, my colleague and I, Alec Hawkins, we worked together on a number of different projects, but he's my co-adventurer on a lot of these different
Oh,
places we
cool.
go for research. And but he and I just started walking out into the desert until we couldn't see New Hermopolis anymore. And
Hmm.
the sense of isolation and smallness was uncanny. I had never
Mm.
felt anything like that. And my only companion, because at one point Alec walked away. He said, I'm going to go off by myself, because I want to experience what it would be like to be out here alone in the Egyptian desert. So I was alone, he was alone. And once that happened, my only companion aside from the desert beneath my feet were those stars. And it does kind of nurture you in a way. You could see why the Egyptians talk about Newman, the goddess of stars, nurturing us.
And then add hallucinogens on top of that.
Yeah, could only imagine.
I didn't do
So
that
it's
this
like,
time.
okay, we're really starting to understand where a lot of this stuff came from.
I think I'd have had a hard time getting past Egyptian customs with my sack of mushrooms, but maybe one day.
Yeah.
You gotta know a guy.
Yeah.
Do you know a guy?
We may.
Danny, it's really been this has been absolutely fascinating. We're so glad that you took the time to speak with us. Tell everybody where they can find the book and
It's
find more.
available at all major booksellers. It was published by Inner Traditions. They do a great job. It came out March 11th, and if you read it and like it, don't like it, reach out to me. I'm accessible on all the major platforms: Facebook, Instagram, X. You can find me under my name, PD Newman, and I'd love to hear your reflections, questions, criticisms. To be frank, I just love to nerd out on this stuff, and any opportunity I have to discuss it, I'm all in. So yeah, check out the book and
Cool.
reach out to me.
All right, man. We greatly appreciate it. And when the next book comes out, you got my email. Let us know.
I sure will. Thank you guys for having me, Ross, Gary. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Our pleasure. It was our pleasure.